Many security leaders struggle, not because they don't want to understand the business, but in some cases, I don't think the business wants security to understand it. So there's like this inverse challenge, I think, that a lot of security programs have as well.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC.
I'm joined today by Scott King, who's the Vice President and Global CISO for Encore Capital Group. Scott, welcome to the show.
Sam, thank you so much for having me.
I have been saying for a while that the biggest problem in security that I can think of is this gap between security and the business. And I know that's a point near and dear to your heart. How do you think organizations should be designing that shared vision between IT and security and the business?
You know, it's a really complex kind of and hard question to answer. There isn't one answer either. Every business is different. Every business has its own uniqueness. What I've seen in my career, though, is more often than not, security teams don't have an appreciation for what their companies do. They're focused on security. They're focused on hardening systems. They're focused on pen testing. They're focused on all of the elements of running a security program that you would expect. However, to do that effectively, you really have to spend quite a bit of time learning what your business does and how security enables your business to be successful. The time is gone when a security program can just be confident in the fact that they're purely a cost center within an organization. For companies nowadays, your security organization needs to be part of your P&L. It needs to be part of the differentiator between your company and what your customers and what your suppliers can leverage to be effective in protecting information and systems. So by understanding the business, you're able to really show where security is helping facilitate the business goals and the business strategy.
Funny, my CFO often says that money sits in two states. It's either, at rest at like a gold brick, or it's in motion as part of a company that produces more money. And to some degree, we've got to, I think security practitioners, we have to think, how are we helping the machine? I think we too often think about how we protect the brick, but on the other side, they expect us to almost be, I hate the term, but hobbyists. Have you found that that's the case? I mean, when you actually manage to get to that shared vision, does the business side respond well, or are there any tricks you'd recommend or strategies?
Definitely. I'll try to pick that question apart into a few responses. So first off, you're never done understanding the business. The business is always going to be changing and growing and shifting, and you always have to spend time understanding what the growth and the shifts look like. There's also, elements of the business expanding that, come through either standing up new, smaller capabilities or even through M&A and getting involved in those processes and how the merger and acquisition process actually is secretive to the growth of the larger business at hand. But kind of picking up where your question, I think, was going is when it comes to mapping the security objectives and the security priorities to the business growth and revenue streams, they have to work in hand with those components. And the only way that you're able to do that is to really spend the time working with the business leaders and building the relationships that are necessary to extract that type of information and then make sense of it from a security program perspective. I won't ever be done on that mission with the company that I work at now. And I think, though, that many security leaders struggle, not because they don't want to understand the business, but in some cases, I don't think the business wants security to understand it. So there's like this inverse challenge, I think, that a lot of security programs have as well.
It's like inviting Dr. No in, or the Department of No, right? They're like,
That's right.
But there is a, I've never seen a security program that didn't get better knowing the business and actually better what it does. And the business didn't benefit by having that risk discussion at the higher table. You know, the discussion alongside finance and operations and legal risk, for instance. But maybe I could pick on something you said there, and we could go a bit deeper. I think you alluded to rogue IT a little bit when you said change, right? So the business is changing, and it's doing so in some predictable ways and some unpredictable. That locus of control slipping away from IT, and of course that means the security team too, like signing up for a new SaaS service just because it's expedient or it's cheaper than going to the IT department. So how does IT and in particular security deal with that? How do you think they overcome that challenge?
You know, that in and of itself we could probably talk about for, an entire day. I think the short version, though, is it's all about relationships and building relationships to understand what's needed and then developing plans associated with that. So you did pick up what I was putting down. I was kind of alluding to the shadow IT, or the more politically correct term, I think, is pure IT. And there's always going to be those elements, right? Every single business unit within a company is going to have somebody that's more technically inclined, or people that are more technically inclined than others. And those individuals are always going to want to be involved in some of the technology-based decision-making. So I think the trick is incorporating them. So building relationships and then incorporating the people that are technically inclined and want to be involved in the decision-making behind how technology is adopted and how technology is used to support that business process and that business function, and then bringing that back into the kind of broader IT ecosystem, either directly or indirectly, to incorporate into the broader strategy and planning. And the reason why that's so important is because typically business units will go out and create their own shadow functions because they're not able to get the support from an IT counterpart or from an IT organization for exactly the reasons you mentioned. Either it's too slow, too expensive, or a whole multitude of other reasons might come to bear. And there actually could be benefit to letting a business unit go out and explore different options and different approaches, but there has to be a plan to ensure that the security controls are met, the data confidentiality requirements are adhered to, regulatory compliance is achieved, and several other elements that you'd want to make sure were being addressed. But from that perspective, it can be healthy to approach it that way, but it can't be approached that way in a silo. That's when you start to have real big problems.
Yeah, it's I think I hear you saying that there's two gauntlets thrown down in the organization by businesses that seek this type of agility. One is, okay, security folks, you have to figure out how to secure this thing that we're going to do. And hey, IT, you kind of have to get more flexible and agile and more reasonable, as opposed to just the fiat or, hey, I'm in charge and you do it because the CIO says so. But those are distinct requests. And then, because I could see an average CIO going, wow, Scott's encouraging them to go do it. And that's actually not what you're saying. You're saying, if you're going to do it, we're with you. But there's a similar challenge to the IT department to improve its efficiency and its speed of service and so on. Is that a good conclusion there?
That's a fantastic way that you summarize that. That's exactly what I'm saying. And just to even put a sharper point on it, when you have a business need that involves a technical solution or approach that isn't or can't be met with an existing quote unquote IT shop, you can't slow the business down. Because if you slow the business down, you're actually impacting your company's ability to make forward progress. And then that has a cascading effect of not being able to drive enough support to continue the investment needs around technology or around security. So it's this circular thing that you're trying to navigate and balance against at all times. I've been saying for years that there's no reason to have an IT organization or to have a security organization if there isn't the business to support it. So how do you take that into account and support that business while at the same time ensuring that you're dotting I's and crossing T's along the way? That is the challenge.
Yeah, I've even seen this notion of a CSIO. I won't use it the other way around because then it's confusing. Chief Security and Information Officer. But in some cases, a CSO in very young companies, but no CIO. And I think this is that both the security department and the CIO, the IT department, have this notion of they have to transform to be brokers of services as opposed to custodians, right? The first reflex shouldn't be let me go build a stack and open up a data center. It should instead be, how do I get a catalog of things that meet our criteria and quality and interoperate? And that doesn't mean I have to be deploying IT people with spanners to make it happen.
That's right. Or maybe it does, right? But you need to approach in the way that you described to come to that conclusion. You can't just have a default approach. You have to think through every situation and kind of design your strategy, even micro strategies that could also be referred to as, kind of tactical plans in alignment with what your business needs from you. Otherwise, you're completely missing the mark and you're pursuing things like passion projects and other things that are cool just because they're cool.
I think shift gears again, and let's talk about what's happening around us. I think it's become a bit hackneyed to blame everything on COVID-19 and the new, work from the office to work from home to work from anywhere. But let's throw that into the mix here a little bit. And does that in some ways broaden what the IT, the CIO and the CSO have to do? Does it encourage or accelerate this? Does it create new challenges? Is it even relevant to the conversation? Is this move to remote and COVID as a catalyst? How is that impacting this sort of environment?
Wow, that is a really complicated question, or maybe not complicated, involved question to answer. Let's start picking that apart though at the end user level, at the resource level. So for last couple decades, most companies, not all, but most companies have thought about protecting their workers electronically by ensuring that their computers that they use daily were within an office building afforded protections of a perimeter. And I will argue that that has always been a false premise for how to protect these assets. Every single asset that every single resource we have in a company uses needs to be thought of and treated as an island. Either it can protect itself or it can't. Either it updates and remediates itself or it can't. So when you're thinking about where a resource is physically, that has less importance as to how secured or protected the computing or technology resources they're using are. And that has always been the case. But up until the last 18 months, I don't think generally people had thought about it that way. And I think that has a huge bearing on how you're protecting data, how you're protecting systems, and how you're protecting, all of the tenets of running an effective security program. Because if you're not starting with your end users and the computing resources, you're missing the largest surface area in an organization.
Yeah, I'm not going to name any names because I love all my children equally, but I have two managers on my team, and the first one is the one who's all about binary. It's good or bad, and is the enforcer, and has no problem telling people that they're breaking the rules, but every dot must be dotted and every T must be crossed, right? The second one sometimes has a harder time just saying no, but sees himself in service to the organization and to the business. And so he's much more about negotiation and compromise. And I'm going to put it out there. I think we all know people of both types in security, right? The one who's the black and white, the one who's the shades of gray. What's the message with this change and this shift? What's the message to these two people? Is there a message for IT and infosec teams around this, about how they do their job going forward and what they do with their old skills and attitudes? How would you address that?
Well, my perspective is you have to have both. Most people that grew up in this profession coming from operational security backgrounds have a hard time not looking at it in terms of black and white, yes and no, on or off, ones and zeros. People that may have either come from operational backgrounds in security, or maybe have come into security from other paths like engineering, architecture, compliance, things along those lines, tend to operate by default in kind of different flavors, different shades of gray, if you will. There's a blending of those two. And I think what it comes down to for any organization is you're always going to have people that are yes and no. You're always going to have people that are okay, but, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. I look at it a little bit more simply. You need to have your opposing bookends. So you need to know what is always going to be okay and what is never going to be okay. And those need to be hard and fast bookends that maybe you come back and address periodically, but they're pretty steady state. Oftentimes those are codified in policy or standards or some sort of governance component within a security program. But then you're going to have everything in the middle. And everything in the middle is always going to be a trade-off between running your business, driving revenue and profit, or slowing things down and making them more secure along the way. Now, there's never a right or wrong answer until a negative outcome occurs, right? So like we can sit here and we can have a debate all day long as to how much value database encryption outside of regulatory compliance and other things actually provides, knowing that when an application uses the data, it comes across and is presented in plain text, right? So you can start to get into those philosophical discussions that lend themselves into technology. But at the end of the day, how much protection do you get from the types of threats that would impact a database from database encryption? Well, that's the conversation, right? So how much money do you spend versus how much money do you save? But you're never going to know the true answer to that question until that protection actually prevents something bad from happening, or something bad does happen because of a trade-off decision that was made previously. That's when the rubber hits the road. Up until then, it's all theoretical. So I think to kind of get back to your question, you have to have that all-encompassing view. And no matter what your decisions are, you have to be making those decisions in an informed way. You have to have the conversations. There's always going to be trade-offs, and nothing's ever going to be perfect. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's right for your business. And sometimes that results in something bad happening, but that's okay because you had the conversations, you made the trade-offs, and now you have an opportunity to change that perspective and do something different moving forward.
So I'd like to bring this to something for those who might be listening. Let's imagine two people listening. One is someone responsible for program, a CISO or a CSO, and they're thinking about, okay, so I'm going from a legacy environment to a cloud environment. I see IT being end run. I see people working from home. What do I do in my program in order to make that transition? And the second person is average practitioner. Somebody out there, we could even say beginning to midpoint of their career. And they're like, man, I have a lot to learn. What should they be focusing on for what's coming? Assuming that they were in step with a CISO who understands this. What advice would you give to the program owner and to the practitioner who's faced with this shift in thinking and transformation?
Learn everything you can possibly know about cloud. And when I say cloud, I mean like the broad sense of the word, literally everything, because the days are gone when you can rely on four walls protecting your systems and your data. And I'd argue those days have been gone for a long time now. Yep. That is the future. That is the wave of the future. So if you are a CISO or in a security leadership role of any kind, and you do not have your own AWS account, that you are going out and learning what you can about how AWS works, the different services that they have, what's free, what's not, etc. you need to, and you need to do that immediately. The same is true for.
But so for that person, and then we'll do the practitioner.
Yep.
You're almost saying cloud matters so much that you're better served to embrace it and encourage future transformation to get rid of the legacy than you are in trying to span both.
That's absolutely right. Because from a cost perspective, your business is already moving SaaS. Your IT organization already wants to move cloud for whatever that entails, right? Whether it's GCP or AWS or Azure, it doesn't matter. And meanwhile, your business is already probably in O365 or Microsoft 365 now, or they're in, Google Suite for productivity apps and email and stuff. So you're already adopting cloud. But is your security organization able to keep pace with what your business is actually doing, as in what it has today and where it's going in the future? And is your knowledge helping inform that, or is your knowledge holding the business back? That's the piece that you have to challenge yourself on from that leadership perspective.
It's kind of like the shift from mainframe, right? It's like you probably have those skills for now. It's not changing that much. And, you got to pay the interest on the principal there. But at the same time, you burn it down by encouraging more transformation until you can retire it. But I interrupted you. So back to the practitioner, what do you tell him or her sitting there going, so what do I invest in personally? Training, experience, that sort of thing. Is it similar or a different answer?
I think it's a similar, but it's also a different answer. So I love the mainframe reference you made, because nobody even thinks about AS400s and asking the proverbial question, oh, what security overlay are you running? ACF2, RACF, top secret, like what do you? So I bring that up also because Cobalt, and nobody knows how to program in Cobalt anymore. But I bring that up because I think that paves way for learning and just seeing kind of the historical piece of this, which goes to the question you're asking. So if somebody's newer to the profession or they're kind of mid-career level, what are the things they should be focused on? I'm going to make an assumption that this person is in kind of more of like an engineering operational type of role. So not necessarily compliance or governance or security awareness or those other functions, but this is really more of like a technically kind of focused role. Because the answer would change for those other positions. But for someone that's really focused on the technology, I would challenge yourself to understand the legacy and the history of computing technology within businesses. So understanding what a mainframe was, what it did, and its kind of nuances. Because what's been really interesting for me in the last 20 years is to watch the pendulum kind of swing back and forth between distributed computing environments, centralized computing environments, and we're starting to kind of land somewhere. I'm not quite sure if it's the middle or if it's leaning one way or another. So understanding that history and how security protections have evolved over time, as well as how evaluating the security of systems and technology have also evolved over time. So, 15 plus 20 years ago, everything was about securing ports and protocols. Everything was about installing like application proxy firewalls and, things that actually could look at protocols and identify protocol anomalies. Well, those things are still important today, but now everything's embedded within an application. So you're looking closer to something like APIs, and you're looking at how APIs interact and how individuals, users, other systems interact with applications in a predetermined way. And that's become the new ports and protocols. So you still have to understand ports and protocols and how protections are afforded those, but you also have to understand how application interfaces work at a much deeper level, because that's where all the data is, and that's what you're trying to protect. And as part of understanding the history and understanding how kind of applications and data can be abused or are more readily abused today, there's an element of understanding the infrastructure layer that you have to take into consideration as well. And infrastructure isn't just I have a server under my desk anymore. It's, I've got an EC2 instance up in Amazon that's doing some critical business function that nobody even knows exists, right? Like those things still happen too.
Yep. And your mention of COBOL, I can't resist. Don't throw out your manuals, by the way. Somewhere around 2036, you're going to need those old Unix manuals because there's a Y2K problem coming in 2038. So just as some of the people we hypothetically spoke about are retiring, you won't need COBOL skills, but you may need some skills that become more rare over the next 16, 17 years of cloud engineering. But Scott, thank you so much for joining me and for this spirited conversation. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam. This was great. I appreciate the discussion as well.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.